Welcome to my stories. I'm Voices and Voses. On this channel, we'll explore the power of learning languages through stories. Learning a new language is not just about words, it's about understanding cultures and perspectives. Stories make this journey more engaging and memorable. If you're ready, let's jump in. Don't forget to subscribe to my channel and let's connect in the comments to make these stories even better.
Lisa Carter opened her eyes slightly when the morning alarm went off. Her eyelids were heavy, but this feeling was a type of tiredness she had been used to for years. The irregular sleeping hours, which had become a habit, no longer affected her as much. She stayed in bed for a few more minutes, looking at the ceiling, trying to gather her thoughts. Before starting the day, she wanted to create a moment of silence, even if it was only for a few seconds. A little peace before the chain of responsibilities began as soon as she woke up. She took a deep breath and got out of bed. She shivered as her feet touched the cold floor. The curtains were still closed, and the daylight outside couldn't come in. When she pulled the curtains aside, she watched the city waking up in the morning. In the opposite apartment, the old man came to the balcony at the same time every morning, lit his cigarette, and stared into the distance. A few people were walking hastily on the street to get to work. She headed to the kitchen. Her apartment was small, but it was tidy. White cabinets, simple furniture, and a place with fewer personal items, where functionality was more important. For Lisa, her home was just a place to sleep and prepare to go back to work. In the living room, there was an old bookshelf, but most of the shelves were filled with medical books. On the coffee table, there were a few forgotten coffee cups and an open notebook. Lisa reached for the coffee machine and poured a cup. The fresh smell of coffee filling the kitchen was the only thing that helped her feel more alive in the mornings. She picked up her phone and looked at the time. There was a message from her sister, Emily. "Can you come by today? Alex misses you a lot." Lisa hesitated for a moment. Her nephew Alex was one of the most valuable people in her life, but because of her work schedule, she hadn't seen him much lately. As the little boy grew, Lisa's distance from him became more and more apparent. Emily knew how Lisa's life had been going and always showed understanding, but Lisa secretly felt that this couldn't go on forever. At some point, she realized that by focusing only on her work, she had sacrificed too much from her loved ones. After looking at the phone screen for a while, she wrote a reply. "I'm on shift today. I might be too late after my shift, but maybe I can come tomorrow." It was a short message, but she knew Emily would understand. She left her phone on the kitchen counter and took a sip of her coffee. She set aside the sadness inside her and reminded herself that she needed to get ready. She went to the bathroom, washed her face, and adjusted her hair while looking in the mirror. She did her usual light makeup. Making her tired face look a little more lively just made her feel better. She grabbed her bag, closed the door behind her, and left. When she stepped outside the apartment, the air was still chilly. The sun was slowly rising between the buildings, and the streets were just beginning to come to life. Lisa walked toward the coffee shop on the corner. She felt she needed extra caffeine. The barista knew her because she came here from time to time. The young woman with yellow hair tied in a tight ponytail smiled when she saw her. "Another long night, Dr. Carter." Lisa smiled slightly. "As usual. I'll have a latte, with sugar. As the young woman prepared her order, Lisa glanced at the people lined up behind her. The crowd had already increased. People were hurrying to get their morning coffees before rushing to work. Lisa felt a strange sense of peace for a moment as she thought about herself in the middle of this routine. She loved the simplicity of this moment before facing the uncertainties of the day ahead. When the barista handed her the coffee, she took it with both hands and thanked her. Taking the first sip, the warmth of the coffee comforted her. Maybe today would really be a difficult day, but this few minutes of calm gave her the strength to keep going. She took a deep breath and started heading to the hospital. The most interesting thing about being an emergency doctor was never knowing what you would encounter. Some days would pass with only simple cases like stomach aches or low blood pressure, while other days turned into chaotic battlegrounds where the chaos never seemed to end. Lisa didn't know which scenario she would face today, but she had to prepare for both. When Lisa Carter arrived at the hospital, the automatic glass doors of the emergency room opened, and the cold, sterile air hit her face. As she stepped inside, one of the nurses, Marissa, approached her with an eye roll. "I saw you got your coffee from outside this morning," she said with a grin. "Looks like you're preparing for a bad night." Lisa chuckled softly and raised her coffee to greet her. "Better be prepared." One of the doctors who had come for the shift change greeted her with a nod and gave a quick update. "It wasn't too busy last night. Just a few cuts, one fall case, and a couple of alcohol poisoning cases. But the waiting area started filling up since the early morning." Lisa nodded and went to the computer terminal the doctors used to get to work. As she glanced at the screen, she quickly reviewed the list of waiting patients. 34-year-old male, sprained wrist. 5-year-old girl, high fever. A 42-year-old woman, nausea and dizziness. 19-year-old male, superficial injuries from a bicycle fall. It seemed like a standard morning. Lisa first went to the room of the man who had sprained his wrist. He was sitting on the chair, grimacing in pain. "Good morning," Lisa said, putting on her gloves. "What happened?" "I stepped wrong while running," the man said, wrinkling his face. Suddenly pain shot through. "I put some ice on it, but it's still hurting." Lisa gently examined his wrist and then sent an X-ray request from her laptop. "It's probably just a sprain, but let's get an X-ray to be sure. I'll direct you to radiology now." The man thanked her and left the room as Lisa moved on to the next patients. She placed her hand on the little girl's forehead and smiled gently. "Let's see, young lady. How's your fever?" The mother, anxiously stroking her daughter's head, watched as Lisa checked the child's throat. There was slight redness, but there were no signs of a serious infection. "It's probably a viral infection, but let's do a urine test to be sure," Lisa told the mother. The woman nodded, and Lisa signaled to the nurse to perform the test. As the hours passed, more patients came in one after the other. While attending to the routine cases, Lisa also tried to keep up with the pace of the emergency room. But around noon, she began to feel something odd, something that made her furrow her brow. There was a weird feeling. The patients in the waiting area didn't look like they normally did. Too many people were complaining about dizziness and lightheadedness. As Lisa continued her routine tasks later in the morning, she began to feel uneasy. The number of patients arriving at the hospital was always unpredictable. Sometimes they came in waves, sometimes just a few at a time. But something felt strange right now. In just a few hours, 3 different people had come to the emergency room with complaints of dizziness and nausea. At first, she thought it might be a coincidence. It wasn't unusual for several people to come in with similar complaints on the same day. But more were being added to the list quickly. 42-year-old woman, dizziness, nausea. 38-year-old man, lightheadedness, blurry vision. 27-year-old woman, headache, vomiting. 50-year-old man, feeling faint. Lisa squinted slightly and focused more on the screen. So far, none of the patients had serious illnesses. Blood tests were clean, and although their blood pressure was fluctuating, it wasn't at a dangerous level. She didn't know if there was any connection between them, but something was gnawing at her. She jumped when she received a message on her phone. It was from Nurse Marissa. Take a look at the waiting area. The number of people with the same complaints is increasing. Lisa took a deep breath and walked out of her room toward the waiting area. As she walked down the wide corridor lit with bright lights, she noticed the movement around her. People were holding their heads, moving slowly, some reaching for water bottles next to them. When she entered the waiting area, her unease grew. Normally, a few people would be sitting in the chairs, but now they were almost all full. And the strange thing was that most of the people here had the same expression. Something like confusion, dizziness, and slight weakness. Some were squinting, leaning their heads back, and others were sitting restlessly. At that moment, Marissa came over to her. "Don't you think this is a little too weird?" she whispered. Lisa furrowed her brow and looked around. Some of the patients seemed to be improving on their own, but others were clearly getting worse. "We need to collect more data," she answered. "Is there a connection between these people? Did they eat at the same place? Drink the same thing? Maybe food poisoning?" Marissa shook her head. "We've started asking, but there's nothing definitive yet. Some of them are from similar areas, but that's not enough proof." Just then, a man sitting at the corner of the waiting area suddenly leaned forward and covered his face with his hands. He was breathing slowly, but it was clear something was wrong. Marissa quickly went over to him, and Lisa followed behind. "Are you okay?" Marissa asked, gently touching the man's shoulder. When the man lifted his head, his eyes were slightly bloodshot and his forehead was covered in sweat. "I feel strange," he muttered. It's like the world is a little blurry." Lisa checked the man's pulse. It was a bit fast, but not irregular. "What else are you feeling?" The man blinked and thought for a moment. "I don't know. I just feel empty in a strange way." Lisa hadn't expected this answer. Nausea, dizziness, those made sense. But feeling empty was an unusual description. A small doubt started to form in her mind, but it was too early to draw any conclusions. Marissa was measuring the man's blood pressure, while Lisa briefly scanned the other patients around her. Maybe it was just a regular stomach virus. As the number of patients coming into the hospital increased throughout the day, Lisa's unease grew. Dizziness, nausea, and blurred vision. Many of the incoming patients had similar symptoms, but no test results showed any serious abnormalities. By the evening, the hospital had calmed down. Lisa was reviewing files at her desk when Nurse Marissa hurried over to her. "Lisa, the man in room 3 is acting a little strange," she said in a low voice. Lisa looked up. "Strange how?" "His name is James Holloway. He says he hasn't slept in 3 days. Lisa furrowed her brow. "Not at all." "Yeah, completely sleepless. And we can't find any reason for it." Lisa quickly stood up and went with Marissa to room 3. James Holloway was sitting on the bed. His face was pale, with dark circles under his eyes, and his skin seemed like it had been smeared with coal. His hands were shaking, and cold sweat beaded on his forehead. When Lisa entered, he squinted and looked at her, but even his gaze seemed tired and lifeless. "Mr. Holloway," Lisa said softly, "let us help you, all right?" James nodded, but avoided eye contact. He clasped his hands together, fidgeting nervously. Lisa glanced at his file. "You're saying you haven't slept for 3 days?" James cleared his throat. His voice was hoarse and rough, as though he hadn't spoken in a long time. "Yeah. I lie down. I close my eyes, but it doesn't happen. I can't sleep." Lisa nodded. "Caffeine? Medications? Stress? Anything that could be triggering your insomnia?" James shook his head. "No, nothing. It just doesn't happen." Lisa looked at the monitors and James's vital signs. His pulse was slightly fast, but not dangerously so. His blood pressure was normal. It seemed like one of the most typical cases of exhaustion she'd seen. But 3 days without sleep could have serious consequences on the body. "Have you seen hallucinations? Anxiety attacks? Memory issues?" James's fingers suddenly stopped moving. He stared at one point for a few seconds, then slowly shook his head. "Sometimes. I think I'm talking, but I haven't actually said anything. And there are shadows. I think they move a little, but I know there's nothing there." Lisa made a note in his file. "While you're here, are you feeling anything? Dizziness? Nausea?" James closed his eyes and took a deep breath. "It's like my brain is covered in fog. Thinking is hard. I feel like I'm outside my body. But the worst part is," he opened his eyes and looked directly at Lisa, I want to sleep, but I can't." Lisa furrowed her brows. The man smiled weakly and trembled. "Because as soon as I put my head on the pillow, it's like my brain keeps going. It feels like my mind won't shut down. I can't sleep. And if I do, I feel like something bad is going to happen." Lisa took a deep breath. She understood his fears, but anxiety was common among those with insomnia. "I'm going to give you a sleep medication," Lisa said. "It will relax your body and help your mind fall asleep." James gave a faint smile and nodded. "I guess it won't hurt to try, right?" Lisa instructed Marissa to give him a low dose of a strong sleeping pill. A few minutes later, Marissa returned with an injectable form of the medication. "This will relax your muscles and put your brain into sleep mode," Lisa said. "Don't worry, we're right here." Marissa injected the needle into James's arm, and the medication slowly spread through his body. Lisa watched the monitor, seeing that his heart rate remained steady, and his blood pressure stayed normal. "You can close your eyes now," Lisa said calmly. James nodded slightly and closed his eyes. However, a few seconds later, his eyes started to crack open again. He tried to force them closed, but it was impossible. The room was silent. Lisa and Marissa waited for him to fall into a deep sleep. But time passed. 5 minutes passed. Nothing changed. 10 minutes passed. James was still there, eyes closed, but his body remained awake. 20 minutes. Finally, James's eyes opened again. His eyes were still heavy and unfocused, like someone trying to sleep but whose body refused to let them. My eyes are closing, but my brain won't sleep, he said, his voice trembling. Lisa looked at Marissa, nodding slightly. This medication was strong enough to put most insomniacs into deep sleep within minutes, yet James was still awake, his eyes constantly moving like someone trying to fall asleep but unable to. I don't feel anything, James said, his voice even weaker now. The medication isn't working. My body. But I still can't sleep. I don't feel anything. He tried to close his eyes again, but his body resisted. After a few seconds, he forced them open once more. This time, his eyes stayed open for a few seconds, but just like before, he couldn't manage to fall asleep. It was like he was stuck somewhere between sleep and wakefulness. Lisa glanced at the monitor again. Everything seemed normal. A few seconds later, James's eyes began to close once more, but with a brief gap, they opened again. This cycle continued. His eyes were closing but never quite reaching sleep. His body seemed chemically drawn towards sleep, but his mind refused to comply. A cold shiver ran down Lisa's spine. This wasn't normal. Something was wrong. 3:12 a.m. The emergency room continued to fill with patients throughout the night. Lisa rubbed her eyes and took a sip from her coffee cup. She knew that James Holloway had still not slept since being transferred to the inpatient ward. The sleeping pills had been useless. With a tired sigh, she turned back to her computer, reviewing the records of new patients. Suddenly, a sharp alarm sound cut through the silence of the emergency room like a knife. Lisa's stomach tightened. Room 302. That was James's room. She quickly jumped to her feet and hurried down the corridor, with other nurses and doctors following her. When she arrived at the room, James's lifeless body lay motionless on the bed. The monitor displayed a flat line. "How long has he not been breathing?" Lisa asked, leaning over the side of the bed. "It just happened," Marissa said, her voice filled with panic. The monitor suddenly showed irregular beats, then it stopped completely. Lisa quickly pulled open James's shirt and placed the electroshock pads on his chest. As she activated the machine, other nurses gathered around to assist her. "Are we ready? Charging. And shock!" James's body jerked violently, but the monitor still showed no change. The flat line remained. "Again! Charging! Shock!" Still nothing. Lisa clenched her jaw. She pressed her hands against James's chest and began chest compressions. "Come on, James. Hold on." Minutes passed. Everyone in the room was holding their breath, but the flat line on the monitor stubbornly refused to change. After a while, Lisa pulled her hands back. The silence in the room told them that James would not be coming back. She took a deep breath. closed her eyes, and gently lowered her head. 3:27 a.m. time of death. Everyone slowly stepped back. Marissa took a shaky breath. "This doesn't make sense." Lisa looked at James's still face. The man had looked like a corpse even before he died. Tired, drained, his under-eye circles darkened. On paper, this was a simple heart attack. James Holloway hadn't slept for 3 days. Lisa stood there for a moment in the silence of the room. After giving James one last look, she pulled off her gloves and threw them in the trash, taking a deep breath. There was a weight in her chest she couldn't define, but it wasn't just the sadness of losing a patient. Something felt wrong deep inside. As she walked out into the hospital corridor, she took her phone out of her pocket. Her fingers unlocked the screen out of habit, and she checked her messages. There was still no message from Emily. Her sister knew Lisa's usual busy schedule and was typically patient, but tonight, Lisa felt like she needed to talk to her. She quickly typed a message. "Are you awake?" A few seconds later, a reply appeared. "Yes, I couldn't sleep, but Alex is asleep." Lisa frowned. It was almost 4 in the morning. Emily usually went to bed early because she needed to prepare Alex for school in the mornings. "You couldn't sleep either." She waited for a moment, and then a new message appeared on the screen. "Yes, I don't know. There's a strange restlessness, but it's okay. How about you?" Lisa moved her fingers to the screen, but paused for a moment. Should she tell her about James? About the other people who came to the hospital? About that strange feeling that had been gnawing at her all night? She took a deep breath and wrote a short reply. "I'm fine. We'll talk in the morning." She turned off her phone and put it back in her pocket. She looked out through the large window at the end of the corridor. The city was still asleep, the lights flickering and dim, with only a few distant car sounds and the soft hum of the wind. Everything seemed to have paused for a moment, but deep down, Lisa felt like something was wrong.